This is Josh Beiser from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any suggestions for games you'd like me to look at here on the channel, please let me know. Hello everybody! Welcome to the first episode of Dissecting Design here on the Game Wisdom channel, where with each video we're going to take apart a game and examine its design and what it did right and wrong. And for today's piece, we are going to be looking at Diablo 3, sort of the rise, fall, and then rise again of the game thanks to patch 1.04. So, let's begin with looking at what the game did right or did interesting from the start or at launch. Alright, yep, that's right folks, we have some slightly edited video content here. The future is now. So, with the original release of Diablo 3, Blizzard made several big changes to the underlying systems, and it definitely left some people a little bit polarized. The first one, of course, being how skills and classes work. Instead of the original, where you're free to mix and match however you saw fit, Diablo 3 limits players to 6 skills and 3 passes at the start for if you play it into the expansion. And of course, with these skills being set, you then can modify them further via the skill runes, which change things up and affect how they're used. And I actually like this idea. I think it gives the skills more personality to them, and more importantly, Blizzard changed to a percentage-based system for attacks instead of a flat damage. In most ARPGs, damage is done for skills. It says something like 20 to 30 damage, 30 to 50 fire, stuff like that. And the problem was, this made a lot of skills really lose functionality when you got into the mid and late game, simply because they could not keep up damage-wise with the enemies. Because everything essentially scales to your damage, it allows skills to remain useful all the way until the end of the game. And it allows them to also keep their... It really lets you keep your builds that you're looking for, as opposed to, again, having to mix and match things due to the fact that a skill that you really like is no longer used. But the skill system does run into some problems with the endgame, but we'll be talking more about that in a few minutes into this video. The other change Blizzard did was streamline the stats and such for weapons. Now this one's a little bit more polarizing, because traditionally different types of damage would affect enemies differently. Freeze would freeze enemies, lightning would cause like a little stun sometimes, and fire sometimes did like the burning damage over time. In this game, elemental damage really doesn't mean anything, other than for your own defenses, but diamonds tend to solve that problem. And this one, I think a lot of people don't like because it does downplay them. The only real synergy you have with your weapons or your elemental types is when it comes to special passives or modifiers that raise, let's say, fire damage or raise physical damage, stuff like that. While Diablo 3 was strong out of the gates, it did have some major issues with the endgame, and that can all be linked to one thing, which we'll talk about next. When we talk about the problems with Diablo 3, the majority of them could stem from the auction house, which was a major part of Diablo 3's launch. And Blizzard has come out by saying that they think that, or they said that a lot of the issues people had were more bugs or little things with the system or with the game and not relating to the auction house, but I think the vast majority of us feel that that was a lie. The problems with the auction house stem from a few, or with the original form of Diablo 3, stem from a few areas. The first one being how the items were basically scaling up, or their min and max. In the early difficulty levels of the original Diablo 3, things weren't too bad. It was very easy to deal with the enemies, but when you got to the final difficulty, I think it was called Inferno or Hell, that it just went completely out of whack. The problem has to do with how weapon scaling worked. Now if you look at the items over there on the right hand side, you can see the min and max scale for these weapons. That is the lowest it can get for that stat, and of course the highest. And in the original form of Diablo 3, the stats modifiers for weapons and defense for their attributes were very wide. Like, it was like almost a difference between like a min of 1,000 and a max of 2,000 kind of thing. And what happened was you could get some very powerful loot, stuff that could carry you 5-10 levels, or you could get stuff that just had no effect on you or was worse than what you were using. Because again, the ratio or the difference between the min-max was so high. The other thing that added difficulty was the fact that before, items were basically rolling for every attribute. So you could get a intelligence on a barbarian helmet, or a barbarian weapon, or dexterity on a witch doctor knife. And again, due to the primary attribute system that they put into place, if you have the wrong primary attribute, the weapon or the item is useless. So what ended up happening was a whole lot had to go right in order for an item to work. You needed to have the correct weapon, the correct rarity, the correct attributes on that weapon, and then the correct stats for said weapon. And that's a whole lot of things that can come up to screw you. Another point that was very debatable and kind of stupid on Blizzard's part was in the original form of Diablo 3, if a melee enemy hit you or starts attack animation while you were running away from it, it would still connect. They chalked that up to latency with the servers, but it just seemed like a very stupid response there. And this also added to the frustration, because the enemies in Act 2, those damn snake guys, they just chased me down and kicked my butt, and there was nothing I could do about it. And when you have the issues with the loot, that drove people, of course, to the auction house. And you could either spend real money or in-game gold. Because of the varying item qualities and the ranges on the attributes, you could earn some pretty big money if you got a really good item. In fact, I actually paid off my Diablo 3 Collector's Edition by selling items that I found in-game. I then tried the lucrative job of being an item seller, and that didn't work after that. But these issues just led to Diablo 3's Endgame being very frustrating, and no one really wanted to do it. They even admitted at the start that none of the people on their design team could beat, I think, the original form of Diablo 3's difficulty. And the game kind of sputtered around, or kind of spun around in circles there, for a good year or so. And it was really looking like Diablo 3 would be the first quote-unquote failure from Blizzard. But, as we know, things weren't the case, and their redemption run began. When it comes to Blizzard's or Diablo 3's redemption run, we can start looking at it with patch 1.04. This was the precursor to Reaper of Souls, and what kind of started to lead into a lot more great stuff happening with the game. The first one being the new adventure mode. This was added, I believe, right around, this was either patch 1.04 or right at Reaper of Souls. This was essentially a quote-unquote free play mode for Diablo 3, where you could go around and do whatever you want in the 4 or eventually 5 acts, with random quests in the form of bounties, and a lot more just in terms of variety, instead of just having to listen through the same cutscenes and quests over and over again. Another thing they did was a complete gutting and restructuring of the difficulty of Diablo 3. In the original form, the normal mode was just laughably easy. Anyone who's even thought of an action RPG could probably beat it. And then you got to the final difficulty and it was kicking everyone's butt. So what they did was completely restructure it around a dynamic difficulty. and the player is free to adjust the difficulty as they see fit, with exception to like the Uber challenges, as you can see over here. And what this did was, as you go up in difficulty, you can see bonuses are applied, and typically you're going to play normal to master levels 1 to 61. And then once you get to around level 70, you should consider going to Torment, because new legendaries show up, and you can say that this is where the big challenges begin. And then from Torment 1 all the way to currently Torment 13 is essentially how far do you want to go. As you can see, the bonuses get pretty ridiculous. And as you can see there, it also adds drop rate increases, so you'll have a greater chance of getting legendaries and all those crazily powerful items that you're looking for. And this was a really good decision on Blizzard's part, because it lets you control it at will. As long as you're not in game, you can change the difficulty up or down based on how you feel your character is, and at the same time be rewarded for it. And that reward part is a really big deal. Other than that, in terms of outside of playing Diablo 3, another new change that was added with the Reaper of Souls and patch 1.04 is the new seasonal mode and the Season's Journey. And the Season's Journey essentially is a checklist of sorts of how you play through Diablo 3. The first chapter, as you can see, goes up to level 50. Chapter 2, I think, goes up to level 70. And then 3 and 4 deal with the super challenging post-content stuff. And we'll be talking about that in another minute. But I think this was a really great idea. It also rewards you with a set. And the set is dependent on what class you're currently using for the Season Journey. And of course you get a cute little pet and portrait, which if we come over, if I can find it, there we go. You can see some of the pets I've collected. And this was a good way of structuring things, and the later chapters pretty much provide a really good incentive for extra players to push how far they can go. And of course you can also rate things in terms of, or you have a ranking system for how well everyone does during a season. And while this is a good step forward, I do have some issues with it, which we'll be coming back to into, I guess, the last part of this dissection. But let's go back in-game, and I can talk about sort of the endgame stuff that Blizzard has added to coincide with the Torment difficulties. In-game, Blizzard has, of course, added numerous quality of life features from patch 1.04, Reaper of Souls, and beyond, but there's definitely way too many to list here. Instead, I want to talk about some of the bigger changes that were added to the game, specifically to counter the endgame droll that was happening. First, we have the Paragon System that essentially is a pseudo-leveling that happens once you hit the cap. You can apply points to 4 skills and pretty much further customize your character, although there is an inherent end here. As you can see, some of these skills you can only put so many points into. When it comes to the endgame, there's also new legendary gems that can be applied to amulets and rings, and these can be further boosted once we get into the Nephilim Rifts. These rifts are the basic one you can start playing immediately, and it's basically allows you to fight just big groups of enemies, lots of elite and rare guys, for a greater chance of getting rewards. At the end of each rift, there is a guardian to fight, and this is basically a way of just throwing out the world as it is and just focusing on nothing but combat. The greater rifts, which unlock at level 70, that level down here is basically represents the difficulty, is the post or the end game challenge. In these rifts, you have a time limit of how quickly you can kill the enemies and beat the boss. No loot drops until the very end. And once you kill that boss, you get pretty much a legendary loot pinata. And that's also where you get these legendary gems and how you can level them up, which enhances their abilities and will unlock new functionality when you get to rank 25. But the only way to do that, of course, is to get into harder and harder rifts. Now over here in the set items, I'm going to go to my stash as well. You can see, first off, that gave you a whole lot of options in terms of legendaries. As you can see, I've got quite a few of them over my time. But they also add in the new Ancient variant. And the Ancient variant is basically an additional modifier on top of legendary and set items. Consider it the evolved version. And they have a higher stat variance or stat variables for their primary and secondary attributes. And consider these the best of the best. Now another thing that was added with Reaper of Souls, which a lot of people like, is Kanai's Cube. This provides you with the ability to essentially collect legendary effects that you can apply to your characters without needing the legendary item on you. So further letting you redefine your build. You can also break down legendaries, reforge a legendary, upgrade, convert, and basically get around the fact that you may just be unlucky with item drops. And as long as you have the right materials, you can essentially create your own. And I believe they added in more functionality to our friend here, Kadea.
Are you ready?
Kadala, I hope I just pronounced that right. And you can also spend blood shards, which are earned from the adventure mode, on random items, and you can sometimes get a legendary, set, or ancient variant that way. And these changes were all good. In terms of some slight quality of life, they have used the quote-unquote smart loot system. So now, items will generally only roll in terms of their primary attribute for your chosen class. So if I'm a witch doctor, I will generally find items with intelligence boosts, intelligent modifiers, barbarian, strength, etc. And this gets around the fact that, again, it's reducing the number of variables that are keeping you from getting the good stuff. And I guess giving more control back to the player in terms of how they progress and what they're looking for. But I think with that said, while things have certainly improved, and I know it has certainly brought me back to Diablo 3, there are still some lingering issues. And I want to talk about that first from the item or, I guess, gameplay side of things. Blizzard has certainly done a lot to improve Diablo 3's core experience and keep you motivated to keep playing the game and especially come back for the seasonal content. But there's still a few areas where I think the game is hurting, and I want to start in-game. One of the problems, I think, with Diablo 3's endgame, and this actually somewhat goes back to our discussion on the skills here, is the fact that these are all fixed elements. Every player will only have, at most, 6 skills. And then within those skills, you only have 1 rune. What this means, of course, is that it's very easy to find optimal builds. And when you throw in the almost game-breakingly awesome powers of sets, it can also mess with things as well. The sets themselves will radically alter your characters, especially when you get these core sets that are usually 6 pieces, 5 if you count the Ring of Royal Grandeur, which I think lowers it by 1. Do I have that equipped on this guy? Thought I did. But the issue, of course, is these sets are so powerful that they basically are what's going to take you into Torment 2 and beyond. Once you get to Torment 1, you're going to be at a disadvantage until you complete your first Greater Rift or get that, legendary or set loot explosion. After that, it's just pretty much about you going around and just seeing how awesome things are in terms of power. Now, you can see right there, what item do I have on that's doing that? me see. Is that a set? Ah, here it is. That's just my badass flail there. And what ends up happening is the end game just simply becomes about get the set you're looking for, get it to Ancient Variant, and then you're done. There's no real additional drive for loot. You of course have set dungeons which were added in Reaper of Souls, but it's very polarizing if people enjoy them or not, because you're basically stuck to wherever that set is, and can be a little bit of a pain to get through it. And even then, it doesn't really change anything outside of those dungeons. But I was just really hoping for more in terms of endgame content. Again, once you get to the torments, nothing really is changing. You can just keep going up and up the greater rifts, but there is a literal fixed limit on what you can get power-wise, because again, you only have one loot table, and that's the level 70 loot table, and then you have the highest quality, which is the ancient variant of set and legendaries. Now, one other thing I want to mention before we get to the final part for this video, the loot table design of Diablo 3, what they restructured with patch 1.04, was a really good idea. How it worked was each level, or every few levels, you get access to a new leveling curve. And this was also what they did along with shortening the differences from your min and max of attributes. So every few levels you go up a new loot table, which of course raises the quality and the attribute variance for everything, or I'm sorry, the number variance for your attributes. And the beauty of this system is that it always presents you with a growing progression curve. Because level 20 is obviously going to be better than level 15, level 40 will of course drop better loot than level 30, and so on. And because of the shorter numbers for your variables, it makes it a lot easier to see a progressive growth, instead of the dips and valleys, or the hills and valleys that we had with the original Diablo 3, where you'll be weak, find that badass weapon, and now you're going to be all powerful consuming for maybe 4 or 5 levels, or maybe just that level of torment, and then you have to go back to being weak again. This way, you're not going to hit that wall all of a sudden that all the enemies are just going to kill you and you can't do anything about it. With that said, I do have a few suggestions of what I think I would like to see more with Diablo 3, especially with the upcoming expansion. So we'll head over there, and I think that will take us to the end for this dissection. Alright, so to wrap up our little discussion here of Diablo 3, the big changes I think I would like to still see are more carrots for going into the end game and post game. They've of course added in new elements with the stuff like the Infernal Machine or the Chaos Machine when you fight the bosses there. That was originally the quote-unquote, like, I guess, raid content for Diablo 3. Then that was replaced, or that was pushed down, and the Greater Rifts became that. But there still is no real difference between going from Torment 1 to Torment 13. Enemies, of course, get harder, you get more loot, but as we talked about, there is a literal fixed limit in terms of your own power levels. And it all has to do, again, with the ancient variants. What I would like to see, really, is if we're keeping with how it's set up here, I would like to see a difference in difficulty once you get to Torment 7. Change things up. Add new enemies, new bounties. Make things harder, and make it so that there is a point to becoming more powerful. This may be controversial, but I would really like to see another loot table added once you get to Torment 7. In the original form of Diablo 3, while the level curve was, or the leveling cap was at 60, you could still find level 61, 62, and 63 items. This was kind of Blizzard's way of extending the power curve beyond the leveling curve. And I wouldn't mind seeing something along those lines, again, once we get to this point. And for those of you who haven't played Diablo 3 or haven't played it since the original form of the game, you're not going to get to Torment 7 in a few hours. Unless you get really, really lucky in terms of loot, you're going to need to get those sets going. And maybe even get a few Ancients on top of that before you can start looking at Torment 7. So at this point, the people who get there, these aren't the casual players. These are your hardcore. And while the season's journey does take you far into the Torments, without having something new to do, it just feels like more or less I'm just doing the same thing over and over again. Which, of course, Diablo 3 is built around that kind of grind, but it's built around a grind that introduces new stuff to keep you motivated. And also, if they want to continue this trend, I think there definitely needs to be more content added, especially with the seasons. The last few seasons have just brought nothing new to the table outside of a new pet and a portrait. And it's going to be really telling what's going to happen after the next expansion, which at the time of this recording there hasn't been any new info other than we're getting the Necromancer back. But it's hard to tell right now if Diablo 3, after all the changes, after patch 1.04 Rebirth Souls, if it has the same longevity built into it that Diablo 2 had. And I think at this moment my answer is no. Even though Diablo 3 has a far more extensive endgame content, Diablo 2's design, especially by the fact that you were able to essentially define your character by your attribute points. You were free to build your character any way you wish. It basically allowed for a far greater power curve and far more freedom in defining your character. And that was one point that I'm afraid I didn't mention earlier in the video, but of course is the fact that you no longer apply points to your builds. Now if you look at other ARPGs that were released, especially Grim Dawn, they went back to that older style. And Grim Dawn is another fascinating game, and maybe at some point we'll do a dissection on that. But with the ability to define your character however you wish, it of course affords you the ability to go as far as you're willing to go. The game's not telling you that you can only get this strong and that's it. And of course they've added more stuff here, and the cosmetic stuff is nice, but again, I want more challenge. In fact, I would honestly suggest or pitch, no matter how crazy this sounds, that there should be some kind of new endgame challenge with each new season. A new chaos boss, a new greater rift variant. Again, something new to, I guess, warrant coming back to the game over and over again. And the base systems of Diablo 3 are really quite good. It's one of the things that I love. I mean, hell, I've played through multiple seasons already. Let me see. I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Which one did I skip? Oh, well, the answer is that I skipped 7 and 8. So, I mean, I have been playing this game for a very long time, and I've lost a whole lot of heroes in that time. And it's just, I think, missing that final piece to really give it the longevity and the replayability that it deserves. But let's wrap things up here. Thank you so much for watching this first Dissecting Design video. Let me know what you think, especially in terms of the flow of the video, what we talked about, and especially about not having the music on. I felt it was a little bit too distracting, and the whole point of the video is to talk more about the design and not so much the playing of the game. I'll switch back to my latest character so you can see my little pet here. But of course, if you enjoy things, be sure to like and subscribe and all that. If you have a game, good or bad, that you think warrants a design dissection, please let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I am Josh Beiser from GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games. This has been Dissecting Design with Diablo 3. Be sure to check back daily for more great content here and on Game Wisdom. Take care. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GWBicer for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GWBicer for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.